Hello, dear students, colleagues, and whoever else is looking at this video lecture. I want to welcome you to this in-depth look at major media theories, which in my view is absolutely important for us to delve deep into, given the conditions in which we live with the digital technologies. Um, Permeating every aspect of our lives. And in many ways, there are certain technologies that are intended to control our lives. So, how we turn the tables and take control for ourselves and take advantage of these wonderful technologies is through knowledge. And theories are important as lenses and tools for us to gain knowledge and reflect upon that knowledge and have the skills to navigate our ways around the theory. So I've prepared a whole bunch of notes. This is going to be a long lecture, so bear with me and hang in there. You can always pause in the middle, take a break, go get a glass of water or what have you, and come back to it. That's the beauty of these technologies that we have. So I'll share a screen and we'll go right to it, and I'll do my formal lecture for you. So bear with me as I navigate through this share screen business. All right, I trust everyone is seeing this. Okay. Welcome, students, to this in-depth exploration of major media theories and the vast and dynamic field of communication. These theories serve as lenses through which we can analyze, interpret, and comprehend the complex interplay of media and society. Our journey will traverse seminal perspectives that have shaped our understanding of media's influence, from traditional models to contemporary frameworks. So let's start with the major theories. Theories of media effects. The first one that I want to discuss is the hypodermic needle model. You might have heard of this theory in different contexts. The hypodermic needle model, also known as the magic bullet or transmission belt model, is a communication theory that originated in the early 20th century. This model posits a direct and powerful influence of mass media on audiences, likening the media's impact to a hypodermic needle injecting a message directly into the passive recipient. The theory suggests that audiences are homogeneous and media messages have a uniform and immediate effect on everyone who is exposed to them. So, what are the key characteristics of this model? First, passive audience. The model assumes that audiences are passive and highly susceptible to media influence. It envisions individuals as recipients of messages who accept and internalize the content without critical thought or resistance. Number two, uniform effects. According to this model, media messages have a uniform and predictable impact on the entire audience. It implies that everyone who receives a particular message will react in a similar manner, absorbing the information as intended by the media. Direct influence is the other element. The hypodermic needle model suggests a direct and immediate influence of media messages on audience attitudes, I meant to say, beliefs and behaviors. It implies that the media has the power to shape public opinion without any intervening factors. Number four, the last one of the characteristics, is the limited role of individual differences. The theory tends to overlook individual differences, assuming that all members of the audience respond similarly to media messages. It doesn't consider variations in personal characteristics, experiences, or social contexts that may affect how individuals interpret and respond to media content. So there are some critiques, and I need to point out the limitations of this theory. Let's discuss that. While the hypodermic needle model was influential in shaping early communication theories, it has faced significant criticism and has been largely discredited due to several limitations. Number one, oversimplification. Critics argue that the model oversimplifies the complexities of human behavior and communication. People are not passive receivers, but actively interpret and filter media messages based on their personal experiences and beliefs. I want you to really think about that. Is that what you do? Neglect of social context is number two. The model neglects the social context in which communication occurs. It fails to consider the influence of interpersonal relationships, cultural differences, and other contextual factors that shape how individuals interpret media messages. Number three is lack of empirical support. Research findings have not consistently supported the assumptions of the hypodermic needle model. Studies have shown that media effects are often nuanced, influenced by various factors, and not as direct and uniform as proposed by the model. Number four, it's the failure to explain selective exposure. The model does not account for the phenomenon of selective exposure, where individuals actively choose media content that aligns with their existing beliefs and attitudes, rather than being passively influenced by any message. Well, in summary, while the hypodermic needle model played a role in shaping early communication theory, it is now considered outdated and overly simplistic. Contemporary communication scholars emphasize the need to consider audience agency, individual differences, and the complex interplay of social factors in understanding media effect. Nonetheless, we should know about the theory. Number two theory is the two-step flow theory. Again, you might have heard of this in some other contexts, perhaps in courses in economics or political science and so on. The two-step flow theory is a communication theory that was proposed by sociologists Paul Lazarsfeld, Bernard Burleson, and Hazel Gadet in the 1940s. That's a long time ago. This theory presents a more nuanced view of media influence on public opinion compared to the earlier hypodermic needle model. The two-step flow theory suggests that media messages primarily influence opinion leaders, who in turn influence the broader public, like the authority figures, the consultants, the experts, and so on. This two-step process challenges the idea of direct and immediate media effects on a passive audience. Now, what are the key components of the theory? Number one is opinion leaders. The theory posits the existence of opinion leaders, individuals who are highly informed, knowledgeable, and active in a particular field. These opinion leaders are considered to be influential in shaping the opinions and attitudes of those around them. Think of the new phenomenon of influencers. Presumably, influencers are in the know-how and they influence us with their opinions. On a higher level, it would be the experts with advanced degrees and experiences in the various fields, political field, economic field, business, the arts, and so on. Now, the other component is the two-step flow, hence the title to the theory. Instead of a direct impact on the general public, the media's influence operates in two steps. First, media messages reach opinion leaders who are more susceptible to media content due to their interest and expertise in a specific domain. These opinion leaders then interpret and filter the information before disseminating it to others in their social networks. Number three is the selective exposure. The theory recognizes the role of selective exposure, wherein individuals choose media content based on their pre-existing attitudes and beliefs. Opinion leaders, however, may be more open to diverse sources of uh, information and are more likely to be exposed to a variety of media messages. Number four is influence on the general public, and this is an important part of it. The ultimate impact on the general public is mediated through the opinion leaders. These influencers play a crucial role in shaping public opinion by interpreting and disseminating information, thereby acting as a bridge between the media and the wider audience. Think of the political campaigns. The two-step flow theory has been applied to political communication, where opinion leaders such as community leaders or political activists can influence the political views of others in their social circles. Anytime you go on TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat and you look at the politically based messages that are out there, you're dealing with such a phenomenon. Also, if older generations that get on television networks such as CNN and Fox, they're paying attention to those experts that are telling them how things are and what this leader versus the other leader is doing, and so on. It's quite selective, though. Product recommendations. In marketing and advertising, opinion leaders play a vital role in influencing consumer choices. Individuals may rely on the recommendations of opinion leaders when making purchasing decisions. Now, let me offer a marginal note here. Given the advancements in artificial intelligence, AI, we're going to see more and more product recommendations by avatars that look like real human beings and act like real human beings and could easily fool us, passing the Turing test, as it were, fool us into thinking that we are listening to a real live human person, whereas in fact, we're looking at a composite of various images turning into a AI-generated human avatar in the virtual world. Health communication, I want to talk about. The theory is very relevant in health communication, where healthcare professionals or community leaders can serve as opinion leaders influencing health-related behaviors in their communities. So what are some of the critiques of this theory? Changing media landscape. The rise of original media and social media has transformed communication dynamics. The traditional two-step flow model may not fully capture the complexities of contemporary information sharing. Anybody can be a content producer. I mean, many of the people that are listening to this lecture, my students or others, have at some point, and perhaps they do it on a daily basis, become content producers, where you, with your own agency, become the person that gets involved with the two-step flow. Multiplicity of influencers. The theory's emphasis on opinion leaders might oversimplify the social dynamics involved in opinion formation. Multiple influencers and communication channels may contribute to shaping public opinion. And we're seeing that particularly on fast-paced social media, such as TikTok and Instagram. Individual differences is another part of the critique. The theory still assumes some level of homogeneity in the audience. We're dealing with a global audience. So this theory pretty much overlooks individual differences in how people process and respond to media messages. The two-step flow theory offers valuable insights into the role of opinion leaders in mediating media influence. However, it is essential to consider the evolving media landscape and the diversity of influencers and communication channels in contemporary society. Always remains an important theory. Now, the other theory, the agenda setting theory, this is the one that I have researched over the years and have seen the evolution of agenda setting theory. It used to be that New York Times, Chicago Tribune, ABC, NBC, CBS, the major networks, and then the CNN and the Foxes and all the big ones, the big boys, as it were the ones who set the agenda, what's important, telling us what's important to pay attention to, and kind of excluding other things, and pretty much setting the agenda for us, like a menu of the day for everyone. But things have changed. Let me talk about it a little bit. Agenda setting theory is a communication theory. It was developed by Maxwell McCombs and Donald Shaw in the early 1970s. The theory explores the influential role of the media in shaping the public agenda, highlighting the idea that the media has power to influence which issues are perceived as more important or salient by the public. Agenda setting theory doesn't focus on telling people what to think, but rather on influencing what they should think about. What are the key concepts? The function. The central concept of agenda setting theory is that the media doesn't necessarily tell people what to think, but it does influence what they think about. The media sets the agenda by emphasizing certain topics, issues, or events, leading the audience to perceive them as more important or relevant. Number two is the media agenda versus public agenda. The theory distinguishes between the media agenda and the public agenda. The media agenda refers to the issues and topics that receive extensive coverage in the media. The public agenda, on the other hand, is the set of issues that the public perceives as important. So there's this competition in some ways between the public and the media. Number three would be the two levels of agenda setting. Let me talk about the levels, because this theory operates in two levels. First level is the media's ability to influence the salience of issues, determining which topics are more prominently covered. The second level is the media's influence on the public's perception of issue, whether that issue is important or not. The theory suggests that the more the media covers a particular issue, the more audience perceives it as significant. Framing. Agenda setting theory is closely related to the concept of framing. While agenda setting focuses on which issues are important, framing deals with how these issues are presented. The media not only selects certain topics, but also frames them in specific ways, shaping public perceptions. Now, let me offer a sidebar here. In philosophy, there is the concept of lying described. There are two forms of lies. There are lies of commission, where the person or the entity, could be a media source, deliberately makes up a lie, manufactures a fictional notion and offers it to the people. That's a lie of commission. There are media outlets that do that, but most of them, particularly in democratic societies, do not do lies of commission. What they commit, however, is the other form of lie, and that's known as the lie of omission. There's certain things that they should talk about, as journalists should do. Journalists should have fidelity to truth, but they don't. And because it's not on the agenda, we're not aware of it. And therefore, it's not important to us, presumably. And that's a lie of omission. So there's a lot of lies of omission produced and reproduced with the agenda setting media. Let me give you some examples. Political campaigns are a big example of agenda setting theory. Agenda setting theory is often applied in the context of political communication. Political candidates and campaigns seek media coverage to influence the public agenda. and emphasize issues that align with their priorities. Number two is the public policy, another example. Media coverage can influence the public agenda regarding social issues, public policies, and national priorities. For example, extensive coverage of environmental issues might lead the public to perceive them as more critical. And social movements. Activists and social movements strategically use the media to bring attention to their causes, aiming to influence public perception and policy agendas. So the theory can help us figure out, well, we can set an agenda about real important things rather than talking about Taylor Swift and her dating uh, extravaganza. We can talk about the climate change. We can use the media to talk about climate change and make that important because it is important. If we avoid it, then it's a lie of omission. But if we include it, then we are using the theory to the betterment of society. There are some critiques of this theory. I'll talk about them. Critics argue that individuals may selectively expose themselves to media content that aligns with their pre-existing beliefs, kind of like a confirmation bias approach, right? Challenging the idea of a direct and uniform media impact. Role of social media is important here. The rise of social media has expanded the source of information and empowered individuals to contribute to the public agenda, influencing the traditional one-way flow of information. So this is where we can turn the tables. If we know how to use social media effectively in an ethical manner, that is. The last critique is about cultural contextual variations. The theory may not fully account for cultural and contextual variations in how different audiences perceive and respond to media agendas. Now, I want to talk about an important theory can overlap in other areas of knowledge, and that's reception theory. Stuart Hall, the late Stuart Hall, is credited for creating a system of thinking about how people receive media messages by encoding and decoding model. And let's talk about it because it's important. Reception theory, also known as audience reception theory or reader response theory, is a branch of literary and media studies that emerged in the latter half of the 20th century. It focuses on how audiences interpret and derive meaning from text, emphasizing the active role of the audience in the communication process. Reception theory challenges traditional views that considered the meaning of a text as solely determined by the author's intentions, arguing that interpretation is a dynamic and subjective process influenced by the reader's experiences and context. So what are the key concepts of this theory? Well, number one is the active audience. Reception theory posits that audiences are not passive recipients of messages, but actively engage with text. The meaning of a text is co-created through the interaction between the audience and the text itself. In fact, there's a famous saying, perhaps not famous to you as you're listening, but famous to me, given my background in this field, that a literary project, like a book, a novel, doesn't come to life, doesn't gain meaning until it is read by the reader. And it is a very subjective form of communication. The reader gets the meaning, not necessarily intended by the writer. It's a different meaning every time. Horizon of expectations is another concept, part of this reception theory. The concept introduced by Hans Robert Joas refers to the reader's pre-existing beliefs, values, and cultural background. The horizon of expectations influences how readers interpret a text, shaping their expectations and responses. Reading communities is another element. The reception theory recognizes the existence of diverse reading communities with varying interpretations of a text. Different social, cultural, and historical contexts contribute to the formation of distinct reading communities. Another element is intertextuality. The theory explores how texts refer to and interact with other texts, creating layers of meaning. Intertextuality acknowledges that readers bring their knowledge of other texts to the interpretation process. Reader response criticism is another element. Reader response criticism, associated with theories like Wolfgang Iser and Stanley Fish, is a subfield within reception theory. It focuses on analyzing individual readers' responses to text and the ways in which interpretation shapes meaning. There are 3 stages of reception that I want to talk about. There is the production reception, examining how audiences receive texts when they are first produced and released. This stage considers factors such as marketing, promotion, and the initial critical reception. Number 2 is circulation reception, analyzing how texts circulate within various communities and how different audiences engage with them. This stage considers the impact of social, cultural, and economic factors on reception. Number 3 is the use reception, exploring how audiences actively use and interpret text in their everyday lives. This stage emphasizes the ongoing process of meaning making as readers engage with text over time. Let me give you some examples. Reception theory has been applied to the analysis of film audiences. In cinema, this is a big deal. Different viewers may interpret the same film differently based on their individual experiences and cultural backgrounds. In literary studies, reception theory has been used to explore how readers interpret novels, poems, and other literary works. The same text can evoke varied responses from different readers. The theory is relevant in understanding how audiences engage with television programs. And this also applies to the streaming of movies and TV programs on Netflix and Amazon Prime, and Max, and Showtime, and all the rest of it. Viewer responses can be influenced by factors such as social context, personal experiences, and cultural backgrounds. Just like any theory, there are some critiques here with this theory as well. Some critics argue that reception theory's emphasis on reader subjectivity might lead to an overly relativistic view of meaning, potentially neglecting the role of the text itself in shaping interpretation. No. Traditional literary criticism often emphasizes the importance of authorial intent in interpreting texts. Reception theory, by focusing on reader response, has been criticized for downplaying the role of the author's intentions. And we can see that, there's certain authors, they intend, especially with novels that are like crime novels and things like that, we know where the story is going and like the diabolic characters in there. So the intent of the author can be interpreted exactly as the author intended with the reader. So those are some of the examples. But in the other complex books and films and particularly like other visual arts, paintings and so on, I think the reception theory is very, very effective and strongly applied and relevant, of course, right? Cultural studies and reception theory. Reception theory shares common ground with cultural studies, and I'll talk about cultural studies later. And scholars have often integrated aspects of both to provide a more comprehensive understanding of audience interpretation and cultural context. So the reception theory has been very influential in shifting the focus from the author to the reader. recognizing the dynamic and subjective nature of interpretation. It has broad applications across various media forms, continues to evolve in response to changes in media consumption and cultural dynamics. Now, let's talk about another big one, uses and gratifications theory. It's quite complex. Uses and gratification theory is a communication theory that focuses on the active role of media audiences in selecting, using, and interpreting media content to fulfill specific needs and desires. Unlike traditional media theories that emphasize the effects of media on audiences, uses and gratifications theory shifts the focus to why individuals choose to consume particular media content and what gratifications they seek from these choices. Let's look at the key concepts. Active audience. The theory assumes that media audiences are active and goal-oriented. Individuals make intentional choices in selecting media content based on their needs, preferences, and personal goals. Gratifications. The term gratifications refers to the rewards or satisfactions that individuals seek from consuming media. These gratifications can be psychological, social, emotional, or even entertainment related. The other one is the functionality part of this. Uses and gratifications theory examines the functional aspects of media consumption. It explores how media fulfill specific needs or functions for individuals, such as information seeking, social integration, personal identity, entertainment, or escapism. Number 4 is individual differences. The theory recognizes that people have different needs and motivations for media consumption. Factors such as age, gender, social class, personality, and cultural background influence individuals' choices and gratifications derived from media use. Number 5, active decision making. Users actively select media content that aligns with their needs and preferences. This decision-making process involves considering available media options, choosing the one that best satisfies a particular need at a given time. Now, what are the categories of gratifications? I've listed some here, and I want to, for the sake of simplification, but not oversimplification, I've listed them as 4, but you can certainly expand on this. Later I will provide you with a list of references for scholarly works and other sources where you can, if you choose to, continue your studies of these theories and other theories that come along, and gain more of a vast array of different areas of categorizations and elements and concepts that are involved with these theories. Now, they work as an intertwined set of theories. They're not mutually exclusive. So let's go to this. Categories of gratifications. Number 1, informational gratification. Seeking information, knowledge, or understanding. For example, individuals might watch the news to stay informed about current events. Number 2, personal identity gratification. Using media to reinforce or construct one's identity. This can involve seeking characters or content that align with personal values or aspirations. In cinema, I personally have created a theory about projection identification. We see that happening a lot. We're looking for characters that kind of represent us. We can see ourselves in the characters. If you don't, there's an absence of identification there. Then there is number 3 is integration of social interaction gratification. using media to connect with others, socialize, or feel a sense of belonging. Social media platforms, for instance, provide opportunities for social interaction, community engagement. Number four, entertainment gratification, seeking enjoyment, relaxation, or emotional stimulation. This can involve consuming content purely for pleasure. You go see something like Dumb and Dumber, that's purely for relaxation and entertainment. It has no intrinsic value in terms of increasing your knowledge or elevating your consciousness or anything like that. And this would be like watching movies that are like that, Dumb and Dumber, etc. Listening to music for just pure enjoyment and relaxation, or playing video games for that matter. So, what are some examples of the application of this theory? So, say for example, you think about the individual's choices for specific TV programs. This is based on their need for entertainment, relaxation, information, or social connection. Social media use, analyzing how people use social media platforms to satisfy social interaction needs, share personal experiences, or just simply stay connected with others. News consumption, examining the motivations behind individuals seeking news content, whether for information, understanding, or reinforcing personal beliefs. Again, like any other theory, there are some critiques that we should consider. Number one is the limited focus on media effects. Critics argue that uses and gratifications theory may not sufficiently address the potential effect of media content on individuals, as it primarily focuses on users' motivations and gratifications. Number two is assumption of rational choice. The theory assumes that individuals make rational choices in selecting media content to fulfill specific needs. However, emotional impulsive factors may also play a role in media consumption decisions. Finally, the critics say that the dynamic nature of gratifications is something to consider. Gratifications sought from media use can change over time and in different situations, making it challenging to create a comprehensive topology. Let's move over to cultural studies. Cultural studies is an interdisciplinary, and nowadays we are looking at the notion of transdisciplinary field that emerged in the mid 20th century, focusing on the critical analysis of culture, media, and society. This field of study seeks to understand how power relations, ideologies, and social structures are embedded in cultural practices and representations. Cultural studies employs a diverse range of theoretical and methodological approaches, drawing from sociology, anthropology, literary theory, media studies, and more. The emphasis is on exploring how culture is produced, disseminated, and consumed within various social contexts. Let's look at some of the key concepts. Culture studies places a strong emphasis on the analysis of power relations and hegemony within cultural practices. It explores how dominant ideologies shape and maintain social structures, influencing the production and interpretation of cultural artifacts. The representation is another area we must pay attention to. Examining how groups and individuals are represented in media, literature, art, and other cultural forms is a central concern of cultural studies. Scholars critically analyze how certain groups are marginalized or stereotyped in cultural representations. Then there is a notion of identity and difference. Culture studies explores the construction of identities, including race, gender, sexuality, class, ethnicity, um, intersectionality approach. Kimberly Crenshaw of UCLA introduced the theory of intersectionality, and that very much refers to this part of looking at culture and recognizing intersectionality. Uh, so again, it's exploring the construction of identities, including race, gender, sexuality, class, ethnicity, and nationality, etc. It investigates how cultural practices contribute to the formation of individual and collective identities. Again, a sidebar, uh, philosophically examining identity, the notion of identity, one can see that identity is a fluid concept. In other words, it goes through different channels, different experiences, different terrains, and it changes. Today, I'm a kind of a person. Tomorrow, I'll be a different person. And this applies to every human being. So, something to always think about. Popular culture is something that culture studies looks at heavily. Studying popular culture is a key component of culture studies. This includes analyzing everyday cultural artifacts, media content, music, fashion, and other forms of expression that are widely consumed and often produced by mass media. We also have to look at text and context when we are applying culture studies to our way of understanding the world. Culture studies scholars focus on both the text, the cultural artifact itself, and the context in which it is produced and consumed. This approach allows for a nuanced understanding of the complex interactions between cultural products and the social world. Cultural production and consumption is another area that it relates to this work. Culture studies examines not only how culture is produced, but also how it is consumed. This involves analyzing the ways in which audiences engage with cultural artifacts, negotiating and interpreting meanings. Now, what are the major serious theories that one has to use when one is doing cultural studies? This is something that I did for several years while in my doctoral studies, looking at different theories, applying them, and working out these theories in different contexts. Let's talk about Marxism and cultural materialism. Culture studies draws from Marxist theories to examine economic structures, class relations, how cultural practices reflect and reinforce existing power dynamics. We must also take a look at feminism and gender studies. Culture studies incorporates, hence the interdisciplinary nature of culture studies, right? Looking at these different kinds of theories and using them and applying them in our studies. Culture studies incorporates feminist and gender perspectives to analyze how cultural representations contribute to the construction of gender identities and perpetuate gender inequalities. We live in the age of post-colonialism, so new theories have emerged, starting with the 20th century and to this day, in the 21st century. Post-colonialism is an important theoretical approach. Cultural studies engages with post-colonial theory to explore the impact of colonial histories on cultural representations and identities, as well as the ongoing processes of decolonization. Then there is much heard about in the news and debated between the conservatives and the liberals in this country, critical race theory. Culture studies incorporates critical race theory to analyze how race and racism are embedded in cultural practices and representations. If you pay close attention to television programs and movies of the past, present, and perhaps in the future, you can see elements of racism that you can recognize. And that's where critical race theory comes into play to take to task these embedded, racist elements in things. And critical race theory is a part of general critical theory, which I will talk about later in this lecture. We also, in cultural studies, look at semiotics and cultural semiotics. Semiotics is the studies of signs and how they produce meaning, send messages to the receiver, the signifier, the signified, and the meaning. Cultural studies often employ semiotics to analyze signs and symbols within cultural artifacts, investigating how meaning is created and communicated. What are some of the applications? Well, obviously, media studies, our work here, analyzing how media influences public opinion, constructs identities, and reflects or challenges societal norms. In literary studies, people will study literature and literary works. Cultural studies are used to examine how literature reflects and critiques cultural values, ideologies, and power structures. In industries, cultural industries, investigating the production, distribution, and consumption of cultural products, such as film, music, and fashion. Then there's a notion of subculture and counterculture. Cultural studies has to look at and explore the dynamics of subcultures and countercultures, how they resist or negotiate dominant cultural forms. We have to talk about critique of this. Obviously, the danger of overemphasis on representation is something that critics argue about cultural studies. They say that cultural studies may sometimes place too much emphasis on the analysis of representation at the expense of other social and economic factors. Cultural studies has adapted to address the challenges of globalization, examining how cultural flows and exchanges shape identities and power dynamics on a global scale. So could that be a critique or a praise? You decide. Some scholars critique the lack of coherence and methodological consistency within cultural studies due to its interdisciplinary nature. But there are other critics that say, no, this diversity is really the strength of cultural studies. So all in all, in my view, and perhaps you agree or perhaps you disagree, cultural studies provides a critical lens for understanding the complexities of culture, power, and identity in contemporary society. It has evolved over time to address new challenges and remains a vibrant field of study that encourages scholars to critically engage with cultural practices and representations. Now, I promised to talk about critical theory, and here it is, my slide on it. Critical theory, something that informs my work, whether I write a book or offer lectures or in my teaching. My work is predicated on my deep background in critical theory. It's a tradition in many ways. Critical theory is a school of thought that emerged from the Frankfurt School. Look that up. I will offer you, resources where you can go and take a look. A group of intellectuals associated with the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt, Germany, during the early to mid 20th century. Of course, they escaped Nazism, came to the US, and continued their work, the Frankfurt School scholars. The work was notably influenced by Marxist thought. Critical theory goes beyond traditional Marxist analysis, however, to incorporate insights from various disciplines, including sociology, philosophy, psychology, and cultural studies. The overarching goal of critical theory is to critique and transform society by examining the relationships between power, ideology, and culture. I have some notes here about the key concepts of critical theory. Let's talk about that. Critique of capitalism is a big part of critical theory. Now, when we say capitalism, I'm really thinking about today's hyper-capitalism, what scholars also refer to as neoliberalism, where commodification of everything is the way to go. The market, it becomes an ethic, and ethics are out the window, et cetera, et cetera. So that requires critique because many of the gains of this form of capitalism come at the expense of so many people around the globe. Hence, the vast inequality that we see in richest countries in the world, uh, such as the United States. So, what is the critique of capitalism as part of critical theory? Critical theory is rooted in a critique of capitalism and its impact on society. It explores how economic structures influence power relations, social inequalities, and the distribution of resources. So we have to look at power and ideology. Critical theory analyzes power dynamics and ideologies shape and legitimize social hierarchies. It investigates how institutions, such as the state and media, contribute to the reproduction of power structures. Alienation and reification is a big part of the work that critical theorists do. Borrowing from Marxist concepts, critical theory addresses issues of alienation, estrangement from one's labor and the products of labor, where things are broken down to pieces, so that the laborer doesn't feel connected to the kind of things that he's contributing to produce. Um, and reification, that means treating social constructs as natural or inherent, where people think, well, that's just the way things are naturally, and there's no other way. Well, in fact, there are other ways. Dialectical thinking is also part of this. Critical theory employs dialectical thinking, a method that examines contradictions and conflicts within social phenomena. It emphasizes the dynamic and evolving nature of social relationships. Then there is the notion of praxis, or some scholars refer to as praxis. That's Praxis. Where critical theory emphasizes praxis, the integration of theory and practice. When you integrate what you theoretically think about, write about, deliberate on, contemplate, and then put it in practice, that's praxis. Scholars are encouraged to engage in transformative action informed by their critical analysis, seeking to change oppressive social structures. In other words, put your word to work and not on a piece of paper that belongs in a library somewhere. Culture industry is a concept that was introduced by two of the biggest scholars of Frankfurt School. That would be Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer. What is culture industry? The concept of culture industry refers to how mass media and popular culture contribute to the standardization, commodification of culture, potentially reinforcing existing power structures. Let me talk about some of the major influencers, if you like, with using today's language, of critical theory. The founders of critical theory. Max Horkheimer was one of the founders of Frankfurt School. Horkheimer played a crucial role in shaping the early development of critical theory. His work focused on the critique of instrumental reason and the impact of capitalism on culture. Theodor Adorno was another of the big boys. His contributions include critique of mass culture, the culture industry, and the standardization of artistic expression. His work often engaged with aesthetics, philosophy, and the role of art in society. Herbert Marcuse, and I've had the pleasure of collaborating with some students of Herbert Marcuse, who are, great scholars, world-renowned scholars in their own rights. And Marcuse was heavily influential, especially with his work in the United States. He extended critical theory to address the issues of consumer society and the role of technology. He explored the concept of one-dimensional man. There is a book written by him called One-Dimensional Man. It was written in the 60s, but it's relevant today, especially more relevant today than it was back then even. And I highly recommend that you get a copy and take a look at it. And the potential for liberation through social transformation. Another scholar, a thinker, philosopher, who's important, is Walter Benjamin, spelled as Benjamin, but pronounced Benjamin. While he was not a core member of the Frankfurt School, Benjamin's work, particularly on the dialectical image and the impact of technological reproducibility on art, has influenced critical theory in a big way. Now, these thinkers all have passed. One who is still alive in his 90s is Jürgen Habermas, the German thinker, whose work has been vastly influential in today's thinking about the public sphere being, social media and AI-driven spaces and places. And he expanded critical theory by incorporating ideas of communicative action and the public sphere. His work addresses the potential for democratic communication and the role of language in shaping social reality. Later, not in this lecture, but in other lectures, I will discuss Jürgen Habermas's work to some extent. So what are some of the applications and relevance of critical theory? Well, in media studies, you can see clearly how critical theory informs analyses of media, advertising, and digital culture, examining how these elements contribute to the reproduction of social inequalities and ideological control. Well, in cultural studies, critical theory has been very influential, emphasizing the analysis of power dynamics, representation, and cultural production. Folks in gender studies apply critical theory to look at various forms of feminist theories. Critical feminist theories draw from critical theory to analyze power relations, gender norms, and the construction of identities. Nowadays, environmental critique uses critical theory, and some scholars apply critical theory to environmental issues, exploring how capitalist systems contribute to ecological crises and environmental injustices. As you may already know, the overwhelming majority contribution to climate crises, carbon dioxide and other forms of polluting the environment, are by corporations, serious, massive, conglomerate corporations that produce things, oftentimes producing a lot of things that we don't really need. And yet, through the use of culture industry, giving us a feeling that we need them. For example, one example could be the cruise industry. It massively contributes to pollution, polluting the ocean, producing, fuel pollutants into the air and so on. Can we not find other forms of entertainment for folks, families, people with disposable income, many senior citizens of well-to-do and so on? There must be other ways, healthier ways of finding entertainment for us. So let's talk about the critique of critical theory a little bit. To be fair, we must look at all different, approaches. The critics argue that the early iterations of critical theory were Eurocentric and efforts have been made to decolonize the theory by incorporating perspectives from marginalized groups and global contexts. And we are seeing that evolution with critical theory, because all these folks that created this tradition of critical theory, they were from the European sector of the earth. But today, given the global conditions we live in, there are people through cross migrations and through cross communications around the world who apply critical theory to their work and try to expand it and open it up and to take it away from the Eurocentrism that was initially part of critical theory. And I'm seeing that happening, and it's a good thing. Contemporary debates within critical theory include discussions on the role of identity politics, intersectionality, and how social movements address issues of race, gender, sexuality, and other forms of oppression. And some people say, well, there's too much emphasis on identity politics. You can take away from the economic needs that need to be addressed and so on. And to some extent that happens. And sometimes power structures use that to get votes, to kind of cover up the diabolic capitalistic experiences, policies that they have by just sort of focusing on identity politics. So that's a critique that we must pay attention to. Finally, there is the post-structuralist influences. Post-structuralist theories, such as those from Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida, have influenced critical theory, contributing to discussions on power, discourse, and deconstruction of binary oppositions. I don't see that necessarily as a bad thing, but it does kind of like create some vague approaches to examining power dynamics. Having said all of this, I must emphasize that critical theory remains a dynamic and influential approach to understanding and transforming society. Its interdisciplinary nature, and dare I say, transdisciplinary nature, and commitment to social critique continue to inform scholarly inquiries into power, ideology, and culture. Now, let's move over to political economy of communication. That's a mouthful, isn't it? The political economy of communication, also known as PEC, is a theoretical framework that examines the relationship between communication, media, and the broader economic and political structures in society. Rooted in critical and Marxist traditions, PEC focuses on how media systems and communication processes are shaped by and contribute to the power dynamics, economic structures, and social inequalities. It critically analyzes the ownership, control, and distribution of communication resources, emphasizing the influence of political and economic forces on media content and the communication environment. Let's look at the key elements or concepts, if you like, of PEC. There is the notion of media ownership and control. PEC scrutinizes the ownership patterns of media outlets and communication infrastructure, also the ownership convergence, if you will. It explores how concentration of media ownership can influence the diversity of voices, perspectives, and content in the media landscape. And then there's the capitalist structures that PEC looks at. PEC is influenced by Marxist analysis of capitalism, examining how media systems operate within capitalist structures. It investigates how profit motives, commodification, and market forces shape media production, distribution, and consumption. Think about it. We have seen an evolution in Hollywood where so many of these superhero movies, Marvel comic types, are produced and mass produced and overhyped, and good socially conscious films have been relegated to the streaming services. And we're not seeing it in Hollywood. Why? Because in the name of profit, this is how they have changed the market and influenced the way in which people view cinema, particularly in the United States. So that's one example of that. Notion of hegemony. Let me talk about hegemony. PEC draws from Antonio Gramsci's concept of hegemony. What does this refer to? It refers to the dominance of particular ideologies and interests in society. Where people voluntarily sort of just give up their freedom and just go along with the cultural practices that the dominant ideology has produced and reproduced and reinforced. It explores how media contribute to the establishment and maintenance of hegemonic ideologies, reflecting and reinforcing the interests of dominant social groups. Then there is the advertising and consumerism. PEC analyzes the role of advertising and consumerism in media content. It explores how advertising driven by capitalist imperatives shapes media narratives, influences public discourse, and contributes to the commodification of culture. We live in a globalized condition in the world. So PEC addresses the global dimensions of media and communication. It explores how global economic structures, trade policies, and power relations impact the flow of information, cultural products, and media representations across borders. There is an information inequality that PEC examines closely. PEC examines information inequality and the digital divide. It considers how access to information communication technologies is influenced by economic disparities, limiting or enhancing individuals' participation in the public sphere. When we think about media consolidation, PEC analyzes the trend of media consolidation, where a few large corporations own a significant share of media outlets. Usually, it's either a handful or maybe 6 or 7. These days, it's about 5 conglomerates that own 90% of media in the United States and by extension around the world. And that's not really a good thing for a democratic society that wants to see a diverse point of view on all kinds of things. This concentration of ownership raises concerns about diversity, pluralism, and the potential for corporate influence on media content, something that we see happen every day. Then there's the notion of digital platforms, surveillance capitalism. Shoshana Zuboff has written Surveillance Capitalism, the book that I have talked about before and will talk about again down the road. PEC investigates the business models of digital platforms, social media, exploring how user data is commodified and surveillance practices contribute to profit making in the digital economy. Taking your private data without your consent, without giving you any monetized profits or anything, using it for building models, training machines to create future products and so on for profit making for the major shareholders, the owners of corporations. The labor in the media industry is important to think about. PEC looks at this, it considers the conditions of labor within the media industry, addressing issues such as precarity, job insecurity, and the impact of neoliberal economic policies on media workers. Neoliberalism, of course, is market fundamentalism, which looks into exploiting resources, including human beings, the laborers, to its maximum ability and increasing profits. And that's why neoliberal economic people are against unionization of labor. News production ideology is a part is an important area for PEC to look at. PEC examines news production processes and how journalistic practices may be influenced by economic pressures, corporate interests, and ideological biases, potentially shaping public perceptions. As a critique, scholars have called for a more nuanced consideration of cultural and identity dimensions within PEC, including how media representations contribute to the construction of social identities. Something to think about. There is an increasing recognition of the importance of intersectionality within PEC, acknowledging the interplay of multiple social categories such as race, gender, and class in shaping communication dynamics. So it's part of the critique that that people who employ PEC, political economy of communication, that must incorporate intersectionality into their work. And I personally tend to agree with that, and there are others who may not. The political economy of communication provides a critical lens for understanding how communication processes intersect with economic and political structures. So it's an important theory that can be applied to everyday practice, creating policies and at workplace, etc. It remains a valuable framework for examining issues of power, inequality, social change within the realm of media and communication. Another big one, cultural imperialism. I think this slide kind of explains what that may be all about. Cultural imperialism is a theory that explores the unequal power dynamics in the global flow of cultural products, ideas, and values. It suggests that powerful and dominant cultures, often associated with economically developed countries, exert influence and control over the cultures of less powerful nations. This influence can manifest through the export of media, cultural products, and ideologies, shaping the cultural landscape of other societies, potentially eroding local traditions and identities. What are the key concepts? Cultural imperialism focuses on the role of media, especially mass media and popular culture, in spreading dominant cultural norms and values globally. This includes the export of films, television shows, music, fashion, and other cultural products. There's a power imbalance that we have to think about. The theory highlights the unequal power relations between dominant and subordinate cultures. It suggests that economically powerful nations are more capable of producing and disseminating their cultural products, influencing the preferences and identities of less powerful nations. Cultural imperialism debates the impact of cultural diversity. Critics argue that it leads to cultural homogenization, where diverse local cultures are replaced by a global homogeneous culture, kind of like a capitalist consumerist culture. Others argue that the process can lead to cultural hybridity and emergence of new blended forms of expression. Remains to be seen. The concentration of global media ownership in a few powerful corporations from specific regions is seen as a manifestation of cultural imperialism. This concentration allows these corporations to disseminate their cultural products on a global scale, their way of seeing the world, their values being produced and reproduced and imposed upon other cultures. Then there is the cultural hybridity, the potential for a hybrid culture to be produced. So some scholars argue that the interaction between global and local cultures can result in cultural hybridity, where elements from different cultures are creatively blended. This perspective challenges the notion of a one-way flow of cultural influence. We're seeing some of that. How are you, Turkish novellas are becoming popular in the United States or within their region in other countries. So who is employing cultural imperialism? Who is using it? Who is bringing different elements from different cultures into new cultural products of dominant cultures versus the, sometimes subordinate cultures. So Hollywood and global cinema gives us good examples of this. Hollywood's dominance in the global film industry is often cited as an example of cultural imperialism, of course. American films often have a widespread influence, potentially overshadowing local film industries and narratives. Hollywood movies are popular around the world. The export of television shows, formats, and news from powerful nations to other parts of the world is considered a form of cultural imperialism. This can influence perceptions, lifestyles, and values in receiving societies. Music industry is a big one. The global dominance of certain music genres, such as pop and hip hop, originating from economically powerful nations, is often seen as an expression of cultural imperialism. Local music industries may struggle to compete with the reach and influence of global music markets. The influence of major digital platforms and social media, often headquartered in economically powerful nations, such as the United States, has implications for cultural imperialism. These platforms shape online content distribution, potentially amplifying dominant cultural narratives. What do the critics say? The critics argue that cultural imperialism may overlook the agency of individuals and local cultures in interpreting and appropriating global cultural products. Audiences may actively engage with and reshape imported cultural elements. Then there's the notion of hybridity, and some scholars challenge the idea of cultural imperialism leading to homogenization, pointing to instances of cultural hybridity. Well, in summary, though, cultural imperialism is a theory that critically examines the power dynamics in global cultural flows. While it highlights concerns about potential cultural homogenization domination, debates persist about the complexities of cultural agency, hybridity, and the dynamic interactions between global and local cultures. Let's talk about postmodernism in media. Let me preface this by saying that postmodernism as a theoretical approach is no longer chic or popular, if you will. It's kind of passe in the academic circles. However, the way in which postmodernism emerged continues to influence the way in which we're looking at culture, media, the internet, the virtual world versus the physical world, how we live, the digital ways of being, and all the rest of it. So it behooves us to understand postmodernism. And in this case, we're focusing on postmodernism in media. Postmodernism is a complex and multifaceted cultural, intellectual, artistic movement that emerged in the mid 20th century. Has had a profound impact on various fields, as I said earlier, including media. Postmodernism in media challenges traditional narratives, structures, and forms, emphasizing a departure from modernist conventions. It's characterized by a skepticism toward grand narratives, a celebration of diversity, and a playfulness with conventions and styles. Let's look at some of the major characteristics of postmodernism in media. There's fragmentation hyperreality. What is that all about? Postmodern media often embraces fragmentation and the blurring of boundaries between reality and representation. Hyperreality, a concept developed by Jean Baudrillard, suggests that the distinction between reality and media representation becomes increasingly blurred, with media constructs becoming more real than reality itself. Then there is intertextuality, which I talked about earlier in the lecture. Postmodern media is characterized by intertextuality. Various texts, genres, cultural references are interwoven. This can involve referencing other media works, remixing genres, or creating mashups that challenge traditional notions of authorship and originality. In postmodern way of seeing the world, there's no such thing as an original idea, original art, original entity. Everything is a copy of a copy of a copy, or a hybrid of something, or rather something else, etc. Then there's the parody and pastiche. Postmodern media frequently engages in parody and pastiche, and it's very playful, playfully borrowing and remixing elements from existing cultural forms. This can involve the reappropriation of iconic images, genres, or narrative tropes in a way that challenges their original meaning. Postmodernism rejects the idea of grand narratives or overarching explanations for historical social phenomena. Instead, it encourages a focus on localized, diverse narratives and perspectives. Revisionism, in other words, is a big part of the postmodern movement. Simulation is a big one. And this is sort of building on Baudrillard's ideas. And Baudrillard was the French scholar that offered this way of understanding how reality and simulated reality, how they compare, and so on. So, building on Baudrillard's ideas, postmodern media explores the concept of simulacra, where representations become detached from reality. Simulations and copies become more significant than the original, challenging notions of authenticity. Postmodern media often employs irony and self-reflexivity, drawing attention to its own constructed nature. This can involve characters acknowledging their existence within a fictional world or media text referencing their own status as constructed narratives. Of course, there's plenty of examples of postmodernist approach. In film and television, you can see plenty. Postmodern films and television shows often experiment with narrative structures, challenge genre conventions, and incorporate self-aware elements. One of the most famous examples would be Quentin Tarantino's films, like Pulp Fiction. They are really noted for their intertextuality and playful manipulation of storytelling. Music videos are a perfect example of postmodernism. Music videos, especially in the MTV era, embraced postmodern aesthetics with rapid editing, visual references to other media, and a focus on style over narrative coherence. Directors like Spike Jonze and Michael Gondry are known for their postmodern approach in music videos. In advertising, we see much postmodern approaches. The postmodern influences are evident in advertising through the use of irony, intertextuality, and a self-aware approach to marketing. Advertisements may play with cultural references or challenge traditional advertising tropes. Video games. Oh boy, the video games. Postmodern elements can be found in video games that break the fourth wall, incorporate nonlinear storytelling, and blur the distinction between player and character. Games like Metal Gear Solid and the Undertale exemplify postmodern influences. Then we're in the business of understanding our digital culture and the notion of memes. Internet memes and digital culture often embody postmodern principles. Memes frequently remix and parody cultural content, and digital platforms provide spaces for user-generated content that challenges traditional media hierarchies. So what are some of the critiques of postmoderns? Well, some critics say there's a loss of meaning here. They argue that playful, fragmented nature of postmodern media can lead to a loss of meaning and depth if traditional narratives and structures are deconstructed without offering coherent alternatives. There's some truth to that. Elitism and irony. Some critics contend that postmodernism, with its emphasis on irony and self-reflexivity, can actually be elitist and exclusionary, catering primarily to audiences with a certain level of cultural literacy. Then there's consumerism and commodification. Postmodern media's embrace of simulacra and pastiche can be seen as reinforcing a consumerist culture, where authenticity is sacrificed for the constant production of new images and experiences. These are valid criticisms that we must take into account. Postmodernism in media represents a departure from modernist conventions, challenging established norms and fostering a more playful, self-aware, and intertextual approach to cultural expression. It has had a lasting impact on various forms of media, influencing the way we understand and engage with contemporary cultural products. Last but not least, as I promised, I want to talk about post-colonial media theory. We are often told and reminded that we live in the post-colonial age. And yet we still see colonial practices conducted by major superpowers around the world, the United States, China, Russia, and others. Postcolonial media theory is a theoretical framework that explores the intersections of media, communication, and postcolonial studies. Rooted in the broader field of postcolonial theory, which examines the legacies of colonialism and imperialism, postcolonial media theory focuses specifically on the ways in which media and communication practices contribute to the construction of postcolonial identities, power dynamics, and cultural representations. This theoretical perspective critically analyzes media representations, ownership, and distribution within the context of post-colonial societies and global relations. Let's review the key concepts of post-colonial media theory. There is a notion of representation and stereotype. Post-colonial media theory examines how media representations contribute to the construction of identities, often perpetuating stereotypes and Eurocentric perspectives. It explores how certain groups and cultures are marginalized or exoticized in media narratives. Then there's the decolonization of media. This concept involves challenging and transforming media structures that continue to reflect colonial legacies. It includes efforts to decolonize media content, ownership, and production processes, allowing for more diverse and authentic representations. Let's look at cultural hybridity. Post-colonial media theory acknowledges the complex ways in which cultures interact and intersect, leading to cultural hybridity. Media is seen as a space where diverse cultural elements come together, challenging rigid categorizations. Then, within the post-colonial media theory, there is the approach to counter-narratives. Scholars within post-colonial media theory emphasize the importance of counter-narratives that challenge dominant colonial narratives. These narratives can be produced by marginalized groups and aim to subvert colonial representations. Media ownership and control must be looked at. The theory critically examines patterns of media ownership and control, often revealing persistent inequalities that reflect historical power structures. It explores how global media conglomerates and local media outlets shape the narrative landscape. Globalization cultural flows is another area that postcolonial theory looks at. It analyzes the impact of globalization on the flow of media and cultural products. It considers how power imbalances influence the circulation of media content on a global scale. There are many applications of postcolonial media theory. I'll name some of them. The representation of indigenous peoples is a big part. Postcolonial media theory has been applied to analyze the representation of indigenous peoples in media, focusing on how stereotypes and misrepresentations perpetuate colonial legacies. Scholars examine the ownership patterns of media outlets in postcolonial societies, considering whether local media are able to counterbalance the influence of global media conglomerates. It's a tough challenge. Then there's the cultural appropriation in media that we see plenty of examples. Postcolonial media theory addresses issues of cultural appropriation, exploring how media industries often exploit and commodify cultural elements from postcolonial societies without proper acknowledgement or respect. What about language and media production? The theory considers the role of language in media production and consumption. It examines how linguistic diversity is represented or marginalized in media content, especially in multilingual postcolonial contexts. And of course, we live in the age of digital divide. Postcolonial media theory engages with the digital divide, analyzing how disparities in access to technology, digital platforms impact postcolonial societies, potentially reinforcing existing power imbalances. Some scholars argue for an intersectional approach that incorporates gender perspectives within postcolonial media theory, recognizing the specific challenges faced by women in postcolonial contexts. Recent developments involve exploring participatory media practices that allow marginalized communities to actively engage in the production of media content, providing alternative perspectives and challenging dominant narratives. The theory has expanded to consider the impact of digital technologies on postcolonial societies, examining how online spaces contribute to identity formation, activism, and cultural expression. I'll have to say that postcolonial media theory offers a serious critical lens for understanding the complex relationships between media, power, and identity in the aftermath of colonialism. It encourages a reevaluation of media practices and structures to promote more equitable representations and narratives in postcolonial contexts. Let me offer you some concluding thoughts. Our examination of media theories has established the groundwork for understanding the intricate interplay between media and society. As you engage further in your studies, bear in mind that these theories do not exist in isolation. Instead, they serve as complementary perspectives, enriching our comprehension of the intricate realm of media communication. As you delve deeper into your studies, remember that these theories are not mutually exclusive, but rather complementary lenses that contribute to a holistic understanding of the complex world of media communication. Thanks for spending some time with me, and I need to stop the lecture at this point.